What's up, Jed the Trigger Trainer, firearms instructor out of Central Florida. Breaking news out of DC. I'm 2 days late, but I've been on the range for 2 days, so I didn't see this when it came through. DC, you're now allowed to open carry. This was passed on Tuesday by the U.S. Attorney. If it's a shotgun or if it's a rifle, you're allowed to open carry in DC now. Prior to that, open carry was banned in DC. You're not allowed to open carry a pistol. Even with what she just came out and said on Tuesday, they say shotgun or rifle. They do not say handgun, which I think is kind of ludicrous and not thought out. Let's watch the MSNBC clip from the Morning Joe, and then we'll talk about what they're trying to say. I do think they put a lot of fear in just kind of their own personal opinion about it and don't really do a deep dive. So let's do the deep dive for them. I think that's a very valid point. Like, since the National Guard, DEA, and FBI are actively patrolling the streets in DC, which I do have some clips that I'm going to add in here, local PD departments have a very hard time articulating the gun laws right and abiding by the gun laws of the state. A lot of times they'll bring charges that are falsely against a person and it has to be beat in court. National Guard is not trained in local laws. DEA is not trained in local laws like this. FBI is not trained in local laws like this. So to put those people, those officers in the position where they now have to see people with a rifle or shotgun walking around, it will create a big confusion in terms of like, is this person allowed to? And you also, in DC, you must register your firearm and your ammunition. And if it wasn't, it was a felony charge. I guess now it may be just a misdemeanor charge. They're no longer bringing felony charges for open carrying in these. And I do believe in the video they also talk about it's a misdemeanor if it's not registered. I think you're putting the officers in a very peculiar position by doing that. I mean, maybe the orders for the officers is just to, if you see somebody, like, don't engage them, but then that kind of defeats the point of proactively trying to stop the violence in DC. If there is large violent crime that's happening in DC, how do you expect a National Guard person that doesn't already know the laws to then stop it? Like, you see the confusion. Even I'm having a hard time articulating it because it just doesn't. That is very poorly thought out in terms of, are there more criteria? I tried to look up where there's more criteria. I haven't found anything as of yet. Maybe I'll find it by the end of the video, but let's keep watching so far.
Yeah, people can walk around with AR-15s.
Bonkers.
It is bonkers. This is insanity.
Federal prosecutors, they were no longer bring felony charges against people for possessing rifles or shotguns
Do
in the
people
district.
in the White House want to walk around outside the White House and have people carrying AR-15s or shotguns?
Right. Of course, there will be around some of the federal buildings, there'll be different rules that will apply, right? Secret Service will step in. They will not be allowed to carry around a shotgun or anything else nearby.
What about on the mall?
But that's just it. Right. But it extends beyond those barriers. This is so poorly thought out here. It says at worst, violators could face a misdemeanor charge for illegally possessing an unregistered firearm. Pirro said in a statement that the change is based on the guidance from the DOJ and Officer of the Solicitor General, and she claims conforms with 2 Supreme Court decisions on gun.
No.
So he brings up a valid point. Like, so the areas that was restricted for concealed carry, even, we have to assume that if it's restricted for concealed carry, it will still be restricted for open carry. They just won't allow you to open carry in a place that you're not even allowed to conceal carry. And what's included is schools, public memorials on the National Mall, and along the tidal basin, and areas around the White House. So federal property, it will still be banned, I'm assuming, because it's banned nationwide. You cannot have a firearm on federal property, period, anywhere. The National Mall, which has all the memorials, I didn't know that was considered the mall. I thought that, whatever. I don't know DC that well. So memorials on the National Mall, which I'm assuming that's just one large area where you have the Lincoln Memorial, you have the giant thing that I can't really think of that's not too far from the White House, and all of those other memorials, you won't be able to have a firearm there. So those places will still stand, but like he said, it is poorly thought out. What the Supreme Court cases that it's aligning with, I don't know. If we're talking about some of the major cases, like pre-08, handguns were banned altogether. If handguns were banned, rifles were also banned. DC versus Heller in '08 that happened that allowed carrying inside of a home for self-defense. Palmer versus DC 2014, the ban on carrying a handgun in public was unconstitutional, so they deemed that, and DC became a may issue state. From 2014 to 2017, they quickly reversed that and became they became a may issue state. So essentially in Palmer versus DC, people could open carry or conceal carry for a very short period of time. Very short, because the same time in 2014, DC became a may issue state. So if the Metropolitan Police had good reason to not let you have a firearm, they could not let you get a concealed carry permit, in which we've already stated. A firearm, beforehand, you have to register the firearm and the ammunition inside of DC in order to possess that firearm. But it looks like if you have an unregistered firearm, you're going to face a misdemeanor charge. If they consider that a violent charge, you may lose your Second Amendment rights. So I don't really know what their guidance is there. Warren versus District of Columbia, 2017, the good reason clause was, thrown out. That was deemed unconstitutional, so DC became a shall issue state. So I'm not really sure which maybe we could say Warren versus DC of 2017 and Palmer versus DC 2014 to allow the carrying of a handgun in public, but they're talking about rifles and shotguns here, so maybe they're extending that for Palmer, and then they're probably also talking about Warren. Those two cases, Heller really doesn't apply for outside of the home, so Warren and Palmer seem to be the two cases of the Supreme Court that our U.S. attorney is talking about. But again, I do think it's poorly written out what they have if they don't have more guidance inside of here, especially for the federal law enforcement that is actively patrolling D.C. right now.
Every big city police chief will tell you their number one problem is guns, whether that's New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, or some of those cities down south.
It's been the problem in Washington, D.C.
Certainly
it's been the problem in Chicago.
So joining us now, president of Brady United Against Gun Violence, Chris Brown. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. In an op-ed that you wrote for the Washington Post with this headline, Jeanine Pirro's refusal to prosecute gun crimes endangers us all, you write in part this. This reversal is antithetical to public safety, sows confusion among gun owners and law enforcement alike, and increases the risk and lethality of gun violence. It's especially dangerous for D.C., which faces unique security concerns as our nation's capital. We already have about 2,000 armed federal troops patrolling the nation's capital, many of them from out of state and operating in an unfamiliar environment. Adding armed civilians without knowing whether they will be prosecuted for carrying in public creates additional risk and a feeling of fear and intimidation. Chris, certainly.
So if we break down those two statements that she just made, again, the valid point of National Guard is there. They're not familiar with these laws. Do they prosecute everybody? But like they said, it's a misdemeanor charge. There is a charge. I assume that if they see you walking around with an AR-15 or a shotgun or any type of rifle, I won't, because it doesn't say AR-15, just says rifle, which we have to be specific, especially if you're not into guns. There are more rifles than just an AR-15. You have 308, you have 308 Win Mag, you have 270s, like you have a lot of rifles, and those bullets are much bigger than a AR-15 bullet. Like those are hunting rounds that you're trying to kill, giant buck with or giant moose with. Like for hunters, there are more rifles that you can carry than just an AR-15. Like that's the most common combat gun, but there are a lot more rifles that you're allowed to carry than an AR-15. So I'll try my best to just continue to say rifles, but I think the thing that we all go to is AR-15s. To have 2,000 armed federal troops there and then allow citizens to open carry during a time where you're trying to keep and decrease violent crime, without specificity, I do think you're going to have a lot more interactions and you're going to have a lot more confusion from citizens and federal troops alike. But like I said, I don't think just because it went open carry doesn't mean that the rules for concealed carry changed. The rules for concealed carry should just apply to open carry as well. So the things that you're not allowed to do concealed carry, you're not allowed to do openly carried. To say it's going to increase gun violence, I would beg to differ because people are allowed to conceal carry. So for the law-abiding citizen, like if we refer to them first, they're not going out committing murders. And if somebody is attacking them and they feel like there's a justified need of self-defense, then they are allowed to do so. And in terms of the DC self-defense laws, under case law, the District of Columbia is neither a stand your ground nor a duty to retreat jurisdiction. The District of Columbia law established a middle ground. Based on case law and jury instruction, you are entitled to claim self-defense if you actually believe you are in immediate danger of bodily harm, and if you have a reasonable grounds for that belief. It goes further to say you may use the amount of force which at the time is in. It goes on to say you may use the amount of force at the time of the incident you actually and reasonably believe necessary to protect yourself or a third person from immediate bodily harm. This may extend to the use of deadly force if you actually and reasonably believe you are in immediate danger of death or serious bodily injury from which you can save yourself only by bringing a deadly weapon against your assailant. So, if you have a reasonable belief that your life is in danger, you can then bring your firearm out to defend yourself, but you don't have a right to stand your ground and you don't have a duty to retreat. So they try to find a nice middle ground there, which leaves a lot of room for gray area and interpretation inside of a court, which I do not personally like when it comes to stand your ground. Don't give gray area, give specificity. We lost Trayvon Martin because Florida had gray area inside of our stand your ground. So to say that a normal civilian will just suddenly shoot somebody because they're open carrying a rifle now is not accurate or a fair characterization of a law-abiding citizen. For a criminal, like most criminals kill law-abiding citizens as collateral, not on purpose. Yes, a regular citizen may get robbed by a criminal, they may get mugged by a criminal, even essayed or anything else by a criminal, but to just completely unalive a regular citizen, for a criminal to just completely unalive a regular citizen and just, shoot them on the street, that usually isn't the case. Most criminals are going against other criminals, especially if a lot of this gun violence has to do with gang activity, or just criminal organizations at all. A lot of that is directed towards other gangs and other criminals. So I don't see there being a lot of overlap there. But again, it's just a lot of gray area in terms of what she has just now done in terms of the open carry, Janine Pirro, what she's done in terms of open carry, and then what the self-defense laws are. This creates a lot more gray area. So I do agree with them in terms of the enormous gray area that citizens are going to face and law enforcement is going to face. Let's keep going through and just hear what they have to say, and I'll keep talking about it.
Sense around the table is that we agree with that. Tell us more as to why you believe this is such a bad idea.
Well, thanks for having me. And, the remarks that were made earlier really cover it. For law enforcement, for individuals walking around D.C. already in effectively a police state, for elected officials, the presence of armed individuals who are carrying long guns, assault-style weapons in the mix is a highly dangerous situation. And look, we've had experience with this in Washington, D.C. It happened on January 6th. Mm-hmm. And the reason that January 6th, frankly, was not a complete bloodbath is because D.C. had very strict laws in place about open carry of firearms. I live right next to Washington, D.C., in Arlington, Virginia. All of the indictments that came out for those who participated in January 6th showed there were huge caches of firearms in places like Arlington, Virginia, in Maryland, because they were kept away from the district because they knew open carry was illegal. So we have past evidence of what having the restrictions on open carry means. Today, now, we have over 2,200 National Guard troops walking around. It is very hard to discern a good guy with a gun from a bad guy with a gun. So it's a cocktail, a recipe for disaster. And let's be clear, Janine Pirro's statement here is made in response to groups like Gun Owners of America concerned about crackdowns that the National Guard is making in D.C. and saying, well, what does this mean, recovering guns? In response to that, Janine Pirro said, oh, don't worry. Open carry is fine, which when you're coming from a top prosecutor, what that means is an invitation for individuals intent on doing harm to to come into our nation's capital and potentially do that harm, making law enforcement making it much more dangerous for every single person in Washington, D.C., including our elected officials.
I never defend anybody on January 6th. That day let me know that I potentially need to take training further. I won't go more into that statement than that. But you don't know how many of those people were concealed carry. All those people were not arrested on the spot. So while they did not open carry a weapon, you don't know if they concealed carry. We have no idea how many people in that crowd had a pistol on them at all. So if they really wanted to do harm and really unalive some of those elected officials, I mean, granted, the elected officials were evacuated, so they literally could not get access to them, but we don't know how many of them actually had weapons on them at all. So to discern the good guy with the gun versus the bad guy with the gun, how do you discern that with concealed carry too? With concealed carry, you don't know who has a gun, so who is the bad guy, who is the good guy? Everybody just gets a blank slate, which maybe that's good. Nobody can be profiled that way because you can't pick out one person from the crowd versus the other. But to assume that just because you have the gun, you're inherently going to commit a crime, I do think is a mischaracterization of people that actually that carry firearms. Lots of people carry firearms. I got into the gun industry during 2020. Democrats, Republicans, people that did not ever want anything to do with guns, then start carrying guns during that time. I sold them guns, so I was on the ground, firsthand experience, seeing people that was like, hey, I have no idea how to operate a gun. I've never bought a gun. I didn't even like guns before now. But as the pandemic was raging and starting and getting into full effect, more people started carrying guns. It didn't matter what side of the political spectrum they were on. So I disagree with her statements and her characterization of you can't discern a good guy with a gun from a bad guy with a gun. You can't discern a criminal from a law-abiding citizen until the criminal commits a crime. So again, mischaracterization. I don't necessarily support all the major gun backers simply because they don't really push for gun education. They just push for anybody and everybody to be able to carry a gun without actually explaining the laws and the procedures of self-defense, case law of self-defense. They don't go into that. The NRA doesn't. Gun Owners of America doesn't. They are not producing educational content to tell people about how to successfully defend themselves based off past case law and past precedent. It's just more of allow anybody to carry, the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. And while I do believe in that, I do also still believe we need to educate people. I've given my opinion before that I think it's wrong to give an 18-year-old, who in my opinion is still a kid, to just give them a gun and not educate them on case law of what they can and cannot do. They end up in a situation where they think they are allowed to use deadly force to protect themselves because they fear for their life. But if we look at past case law, maybe they were not. If we're reading the DC gun laws now, it's such a gray area. How does that 18-year-old know if she did not have to go and take a weapons class or take an educational course at all? So I don't support big gun legislation for that or big gun rights groups for that reason. Some of them I may, but a lot of them don't do what I'm saying right now. So I disagree with her characterization there. But again, I agree with the characterization of it being very dangerous because you have law enforcement that don't know local laws. So how do they know what to prosecute for, what not to prosecute for? If DC is not a Terry stop state, so are officers not allowed to go up to people and ask if they have a registered firearm? Or do they have to provide their registration? How does that work? Do we start to see more encounters? Assuming people even decide to do this anyway, I think we as civilians are going to be a lot more smarter. This feels like a trap. To me personally, I'll tell you, this feels like a trap. If I lived in DC, I would not be carrying a gun openly because this just doesn't even seem like it's smart. This just doesn't seem like it's well thought out for me as a civilian. So I would not be abiding by whatever she's saying right now anyway. And again, don't defend January 6th at all, but we don't know how many of them did have a gun. And again, people from out of state cannot come into the state with a gun. Granted, they might have during January 6th. We don't know because there's no border crossing at each state where they're going to check your car, check your person. We have a Fourth Amendment right that stops that. And we have federal transport laws that also allow you to carry a gun into different states if you're driving through. But we already don't know. So the good guy versus bad guy with the gun and being able to discern, there is an issue there, but you can't lump everybody in and just assume you're guilty until you're proven innocent. You're innocent until proven guilty. So just because you're open carrying a gun doesn't mean you're going to go commit a crime. And that's my statement on that segment right there. Let's keep going.
And what elected official in America has seen personally the danger of guns in political settings more than Donald Trump?
Sorry, we're going to get into that too. I do think it's very surprising, considering what Donald Trump has been through, that he would let this fly. Because like we said, like if we're just talking, for those of you that are not gun experts or you don't really know about guns, please, I hope you're still here. An AR-15 max capacity, like I have pushed a 5.56 round, which I don't have one up here with me, but I have pushed that type of round out to 700 yards, which is 7 football fields. So you would, and again, they say rifle, so AR-15 is not the only thing that is classified as a rifle. Again, I said you have hunting rounds, and hunting rounds are meant, those things can go out to a mile. Like if you guys have ever seen like Chris Kyle or any of those like, you know, cool Navy SEAL videos or movies where they got the sniper and they're taking that mile shot, that's not completely unrealistic. It's extremely hard to do. Atmospheric pressure, Coriolis effect, like there are many things that go into sending rounds long range and long distance. But there would need to be a ban of firearms within a mile of any place that elected officials are. So any place that elected officials are, there needs to be a mile distance between where you're allowed to carry a gun. And then again, how do you enforce that mile? But like we said, if a person wants to do a crime with the firearm, like they are going to do so, that person is not a law-abiding person. Granted, they might not have committed a crime prior. So again, that's what they kind of mean of how do you tell the good guy with the gun versus the bad guy with the gun. But that also brings it to the essence of how do you prevent school shootings when if a person has never had a criminal record or they're not on anybody's radar, how do you prevent those type of things? So that's still a major factor here. But I do think that within a mile radius of, especially the White House, guns cannot be allowed within a mile radius, at least even 2 miles out. Like a mile radius, you can still successfully make that shot. So I'd say 2 miles out, a 300 Win Mag probably isn't traveling that far. A 308 probably is not traveling 2 miles and actually impacting target successfully. So at least a 2 mile radius of no guns near the White House.
During the campaign, a couple of times. And by the way, you're talking about making Washington, D.C. safer. I remember I was having a debate with a guy that was like an absolutist on guns. And after Uvalde, he's like, oh, you know, Mao and Stalin and what took away guns and then they took over the country. I said, yeah, so you're saying we need to go the other way where outside of the elementary school in Uvalde, you had like 200 law enforcement officers that were outgunned by one freak inside with an AR-15 he was able to walk into a store and get. Right. That's the America you want? That our law enforcement officers are outgunned? And now Janine Pirro is saying, come to Washington, D.C., open carry your AR-15s and your shotguns. And what does that do but make Washington less safe?
Preparing.
So I think that's a mischaracterization of Uvalde because they were not outgunned in Uvalde. They lacked the training and tactics to go into an active shooter. They were not outgunned. If you have, like in his example, if you have 200 law enforcement officers, that person is outgunned. The suspect inside is outgunned because there are 200 guns to your one gun. The issue in Uvalde is they failed to take action and actually go and penetrate the school. They were waiting for orders from whoever their above chain of command was, instead of just rushing into that school, clearing sectors, collapsing sectors, and finding that shooter. That's what they should have done in Uvalde, and that's what they failed to do. It was not that they were outgunned at all. Again, I got into armed security as Uvalde happened. Like, I was crying in my therapist's office because I was like, what if I fail to do my job and that happens? That's the worst thing that I would have to live with. So I've taken the approach, and I've done this in other videos, and I got more videos coming up of my body cam of just me living up to my fear and going into situations where there's an active shooter and I have to do everything I can do to stop it. I have literally proven to myself that I will run at it because I don't want to be in this characterization of Uvalde officers. So it's a mischaracterization of what he's saying. Those officers just failed the training. They didn't have the training, they didn't have the tactics, and they didn't have the courage to just rush into that building. It was not that they were outgunned in that situation. 200 guns to one gun, that's common sense of who is outgunned in that situation. What they were what their issue was is they cared for their own life more than they cared for the life of children, which as officers, that's not the case. If somebody is shooting up kids, I don't care if I eat around in the stomach, wherever it has to be. Like, it's the hero thing. It's, it sounds sexy, but you take a round, like, you're out. That might be your career. It's over with if that round touches you. But if kids are dying, like, that is your job to run in, take that bullet. If I take it and my teammate gets the shot, situation over. At least we stopped it before more life could be taken. That's what they should have done during Uvalde. Let's keep going.
For the next January 6th to be more effective?
The worst part is, John, you made the point that, there'll be areas likely where they'll say you can't have open carry, whether that's on the mall or in, I want to know, walk into Union Station and people are going to be walking around with AR-15s. I hope not. But by saying this, you confuse the issue as to what's an area that's going to be considered, okay, what's not. And so by default, even if you think you put in these sort of steps, which they may.
So again, there are already areas that are restricted. So those areas will continue to be in place, I would assume. It would be completely illogical to allow open carry in places that concealed carry is not allowed. It'd be illogical to allow open carry in places that concealed carry is already not allowed. Like, there are concealed carry laws on the books in Washington, D.C. Adding open carry just allows you to openly display the firearm. It doesn't negate the current laws on the books already. Oh my God. So I think that's a mischaracterization. Again, there are already laws on the books about concealed carry, and just because a person now openly carries and displays the weapon on their person where you can see it in plain view doesn't negate the concealed carry laws that are already on the books. So they will likely increase the distance, which is what I would do if I had to think about it as a Secret Service official. Because again, I'm not worried about the AR-15 as much because, like, if you've never been to DC, there are snipers on roofs. Like, you can not even be near the White House, just in the vicinity. Like, you don't even have to be on Pennsylvania Ave. There are snipers on adjacent roofs and buildings near. So within a mile radius, there's a shot that can be taken by somebody, even if it's not from the top of the White House. There's a shot that can be taken, and that's not taken with an AR-15. It's taken with a 308, with a 300 Win Mag, 270. It's taken with a long distance type of round. So again, they're focusing on AR-15s because that is the hype gun that is going to be talked about in the news. But there are more to rifles than just the AR-15. So if I was Secret Service, I'm not worried about an AR-15 because I know past 700 yards, honestly past 600 yards, it is extremely hard to hit a target with the 5.56 round, even if it's 70 grain, which is the heaviest round you can get. That thing isn't coming with enough terminal velocity to actually do as much damage as it would do inside of 300 yards. So I'd be more worried about the long distance shooters. And even then, it's not many that can make that shot happen at that distance. Like, if we go back to the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, that was within 300 yards. That is an effective distance for an AR-15. Once you get to once you double that and get to 600 yards, it becomes very, very hard to actually hit a target with that. Because again, you have crosswinds, you have the Coriolis effect, so the earth literally spinning will change the trajectory of the bullet as it starts to travel more. Atmospheric pressure, bullet weight, there's so many more things that start to go into it. So I wouldn't be worried as much about the AR-15 as I would be other rounds. So I don't think that's something that they would actually, care about that much.
Secret Service will insist upon it in some areas.
I'm sure, but it doesn't matter because then they're going to go into those areas anyway, and then they're going to say, "Excuse me, I heard Janine Pirro on television telling me this."
The whole thing.
Well, but Andrew, what I thought you were going to go to was what it suggests is that all the places in the city that have the worst violent crime, it's going to be fine to carry to carry AR-15s around. Essentially, say, well, we got to protect our elected officials, so we'll have these zones where you can't have open carry. But in Southeast, in Northeast, in Southwest, you'll be able to walk around brandishing your AR-15, which essentially makes clear that there's a different value for different kinds of life in Washington, D.C. Let's put it that way. Also, does this not put the lie to the notion that what the federal takeover of policing in Washington, D.C. is not about crime? It's about this other thing. If you're really focused on trying to prevent violent crime and bring the violent crime rate down in Washington, you would not let Janine Pirro do what she's doing, and Donald Trump has that within his control.
So I don't necessarily think violent crime is typically being committed by criminals, and most of these criminals aren't allowed to carry a gun anyway. You do have the few that have not been charged that are still allowed to carry, but they usually end up losing that right based off a crime that they do eventually. So when it comes to the law, and I don't disagree with what he's saying, or in terms of like what type of life matters. From what we hear, the National Guard is in areas that aren't the worst parts of town. Like I keep hearing about the 8th Ward. I don't know that much about DC, but the National Guard isn't as heavy inside of the 8th Ward as they are in some of the more prominent areas of DC, like the National Monuments and all of that stuff, or the National Mall section where the memorials are. So again, I don't know if this is a justification to go inside of those areas and try to potentially get people that are confused about the law, that maybe people inside of these areas that are confused about the law will start to do it because they don't quite understand it, which is common. Again, I get phone calls from people all the time that just don't understand the law, and they don't want to do it wrong, but they don't know how to do it right. And maybe the way that they've been doing it is wrong, just based off of something that somebody told them and they took it as true. So that is a fair characterization of what he's saying in terms of just like where like the crime in DC is not really about crime. It doesn't feel like it feels more about like a power type of deal. But this thing is really crazy, because what is the purpose of allowing open carry? Like, so you want citizens, and maybe the purpose of the open carry is for the areas like the 8th Ward, because again, if we backtrack and go to Los Angeles when the riots were just happening and the protests were just happening, where the National Guard was deployed there, the National Guard was not deployed to South Central. Like, they were not in the heavy, and let's be clear, LA is a gang infested area, and I have nothing against gangs. I don't believe in committing crime, but I think everybody is tribal. Republicans, Democrat, wherever you stand, like that is your tribe in a way. You just don't commit crimes, most of you. But the National Guard was not inside of South Central. They weren't going down Crenshaw. They weren't going down these other areas where you have heavy gang activity and you have shootings that happen and drive-bys that happen all the time. They weren't going down those areas. That's not where they were at. They were in areas that were not as crime infested or not as bad. They were in areas where the protests were happening, but local law enforcement could have handled that. In my opinion, this is where I stand on it. Local law enforcement could have handled the protest and the few people that are burning cars and, committing acts of violence. Local law enforcement could have handled that one. They could deploy other local law enforcement agencies from surrounding counties, bring them all into LA County or to LA, wherever it was at, and deal with it that way. But again, you didn't have National Guard in the worst areas, in the worst neighborhoods of South Central, where true crime is happening. Like, it is like gang activity, it is criminal behavior. Any gang you're inside of LA, while you don't have to do criminal activity, you're usually not as reputable of a member, and that just goes for gangs everywhere. You have to put in work in order to get rep. So National Guard wasn't deployed there. Apparently 8th Ward is their version of South Central. So if National Guard is not currently in 8th Ward, what is the purpose of open carry? Is it to allow citizens in the 8th Ward that are facing this criminal behavior and see it more prevalently to then carry and be able to protect themselves without sending the National Guard in? Because if you send the National Guard into the gang-infested areas, gang members aren't afraid to get into a shootout. They'll kill a cop. They will. They got nothing against it. They got nothing to lose. They're not allowed to carry a gun. They go back to jail. They're facing life anyway. Who cares? They'll do it. So you send the National Guard into the dangerous sections and you lose a National Guard member. That creates more of a PR nightmare than if you allow citizens to successfully defend themselves against a criminal inside of that dangerous area, but you don't have to send the 8th Ward or you don't have to send the National Guard in. And then you still get the claim that, crime is coming down and things of that nature too. So this is a very interesting case that's coming up right now. Like I said, I don't think it makes that much sense. There just needs to be more specificity on it. I think we're going to see there's going to be some time in between before we get any clear understanding of what it means. If AR-15s, like there are assault weapon bans inside of DC, so AR-15s are not allowed. Hunting rifles, depending on, like, I didn't see 300 Win Mag, I didn't see 270, I didn't see 30. I think it said AR-110s, but it didn't say AR-10s anywhere on the list, and maybe I just didn't know what some of those guns were. But you're not allowed to have an AR-15 inside of DC. So when they say rifles, are they talking hunting rifles? So 300 Win Mag, 270s, 30-06, things like that. 30-06 is kind of not a rifle. It's a rifle round. Are they saying weapons like? Are they saying weapons like that, or what are they really trying to, like, which rifles are allowed? Rifles is an ambiguous term for anything that is long. any gun that is longer than 16 inches is considered a rifle if it shoots a rifle caliber round. AR-15 is not the only gun that is longer than 16 inches. So there is too much open specificity there. Shotguns, that's just old man type of thinking. Like, to carry a shotgun around and to let that thing off in self-defense in public is just kind of crazy. And again, I'm assuming they mean guns that are longer than 16 inches or at least 16 inches, or else it'd be considered a short barrel shotgun, which is probably also still illegal inside of DC. They don't talk about handguns, which, again, if you're going to allow me to open carry a rifle, why don't you allow me to open carry a handgun? Like, why is there's no talk about handguns in this. They're not talking about handguns. They're talking about rifles and shotguns. That is not a handgun because that barrel maximum is like 5 inches. A handgun max is 5 inches to open carry. You're not going to have a handgun that's 16 inches. It's just not, it's a rifle at that point. So yeah, it's way too gray. If I was a DC resident, and DC guys, if you're hearing me, do not open carry inside of the state. I'm gonna just be straight, especially if you're black. Do not open carry. Here's a clip of a lawyer who was allowed to be in DC. He has a permit to carry. He said his pistol was inside of the trunk, and he is being detained by an FBI and another officer that I don't think he knows the agency of. It might have been Metropolitan, but I know one of them was FBI and the other one, he was like, I don't know his name. I can't see where he's from. Here's that video. Like, you tell me what you think. How is this going to go? So this is very shocking news that's coming out. Some people may consider it a win for the Second Amendment. I see it as, again, what I disagree with in the Second Amendment community, where we're saying, all right, everybody carry any kind of gun you want, but there's no education. There's no practical steps and understanding of what it means to carry a gun, what self-defense means, what stand your ground means, when is it justified, when is it not justified, when is it too gray to do it, when should you avoid. Like, there's none of that education coming out from Gun Owners of America, from the NRA, from the Attorney General, or the U.S. Attorney, I'm sorry. None of that is coming out. So I feel like this is a setup. This is a setup to be able to engage with more people who you may not have known if they were a criminal or not. You're hoping that they then carry this rifle. You could probably catch them slipping up and you can make more arrests. I think Trump has already toted the claim that, they've arrested 1,600, hard criminals inside of DC. So I think they want to ramp that number up. But how do you ramp that number up without having probable cause? Tell them they can open carry a rifle, and if it's not registered, they're going to face a misdemeanor not a federal felony charge. So too much gray area. Not my fan. I don't believe this is the win for gun rights. I believe this is something that's going to infringe on people's right to carry long term, because they're going to charge more people with a gun charge. You get charged with a gun crime, you lose your Second Amendment right. Now you can't ever carry a gun again until you have X amount of time where you can apply for a pardon. At that rate, who knows what state the country will be in. So yeah, this is very surprising, but this is where we are. This is where we are. I appreciate y'all for watching. I will continue to do every state's gun laws, but today was DC. Check the descriptions for all the affiliate links if you need a holster or you need anything of that nature. Go ahead, check that comment section down, or check that description down below. In the comment section, tell me what you think. Do you think this should be allowed? Do you think this should be banned? What's going on in your brain? Let's have a positive dialogue about it. Do you think that Gun Owners of America should put out educational content about the laws in DC? I will do it personally, but should organizations that have way more money and backing than I do, should they also be putting out educational content in terms of what legal stand your ground is in DC, when you are justified to protect yourself? How do you get through the gray area of their non-stand your ground, but also a non-duty to retreat state? DC says they found a gray area. Should Guns of America, the NRA, put out content to try to eliminate that gray area, considering they have a litany of lawyers at their disposal? Tell me in the comment section down below. Stay on mission, and I'll see y'all in the next video.